Hello everyone, my name is Errol Wallace and today I want to talk to you about big data, one of the most understood concepts in our modern civilization. As we go along, follow along on the PowerPoint. We'll be starting off in our second slide. So, what is big data? Well, big data is just the accumulated data of a civilization over a course of time. So libraries are big data, and they certainly were back in the days of the Sumerians and those others who began to mark down on clay tablets the accumulated knowledge and pass that on to other generations. We do the same thing. Today we use modern cloud computing and hard disk drives to retain our information for access later. But in terms of modern big data, what we really need to look at are three real turning points in the 20th century and how they began to set the stage for big data as we know it. So first we're going to look at Fremont Riter. Now this was a very smart guy. Back in 1941, he started to look at where libraries were in the 19th and 18th centuries and where they were in the 20th century. He was able to draw a predictive line analysis that said that at Yale University, by the year 2020, there would be 600 miles of shelves put up to handle all of the books. As we know, he really was not able to predict modern digital thinking and digital data analysis. But what it did show was that books and print were accelerating through the 20th century, that we had access to them in a way that we had never had before, and that was really changing things, and it would change the way we would handle data in the future. Now, we all love to talk about compression. We want to take large amounts of data and make them relatively small. Well, this really started in the 60s when the first modern computers began to come online. And once the algorithms were developed to use triple layer encoding on regular data, we found that we could greatly reduce the amount of storage space that we needed. If you're anything like me, I'm 50 years old, I remember actually being able to notch a 5.5-inch floppy disk that was a plastic and magnetic strip, and I could flip it over and have double the storage. That was amazing for me because it cut down the cost that I had to invest in order to store data. And it also goes to show just how far we've come. But as we began to store more and more and more data, we came up with another problem. It was simply too much for humans to be able to go through and sort and understand. So back in the late 90s, we started to develop what we call knowledge bots or smart machines that could do predictive analysis based on massive amounts of data. And we'll talk about that data and how we accumulate that in just a second. So, why do we need big data? Well, we can go all the way back to the 1800s. Lord Kelvin, pretty smart guy, said that unless you're able to mathematically quantify information and then study it, it really was useless because it depends on our personal perspective to be able to remember and record and interpret. It's when you took data and turned it into a mathematical formula that became really relevant to science and to our modern way of thinking. And in truth, think about the newspaper industry. So newspapers just 10 to 15 years ago were our primary means of news dissemination. We got the paper in the morning, maybe in the evening, we sat down and read it. Perhaps we read some of the versions online, but the vast majority was newspaper. The average American read 3 newspaper pages a day. In just 15 years, newsprint is virtually obsolete. Now, there still are daily papers, and of course they play a valuable role, but they are not the primary means of news dissemination in the United States anymore. And we can look at the audio industry as well, where CDs were once the preferred method for distribution, and now, of course, we look at digital media. So big data is playing a central role in the advancement of our technology to be able to disseminate information. Now, the big question, how do we collect big data? There are companies who focus solely on the collection of this data. And understand that when we're talking about data, we're simply talking about a measurable attribute that has been converted to a digital format so that it can be understood and studied and can be used to help predict future methods of sales, trend analysis, all kinds of things we can use. So where do we get big data from? Well, no big surprise, we scrub social media sites. This has long been a practice for us to find out the who, what, where, when, and why of who's on the internet. And because we're in Web 2.0, the interactive portion of the internet, it allows us to gather this data using our digital footprints. Every time we click, every time we mouse over, every time we open a new page, we're leaving a digital footprint, and that can be traced. Also, within that social media world, the things that we like, the things that we complain about, the things that we share with our friends, that makes us social influencers. And we can gather the data on the likes and the shares, and we can start to see a pattern forming, and that feeds into the big data analysis as well. Next is the IoT, the Internet of Things. So, in my house, we have a smart system where the thermostat learns when you come into a room and it adjusts the temperature. It knows what we like to wake up to, what we like to go to sleep to, and all of that data is recorded and sent to a central data warehouse. So the IoT, the remote to turn your lights on, the smartphone applications that you use, that is the Internet of Things, and all of that information is gathered as well. Well, let's talk about activity-generated data. So, you go to Amazon, you buy the shoes, you go to the cart, you do a financial transaction. That's all been recorded. It's been recorded by your credit card company, by Amazon, by Google if you're using a Chrome browser, and it's being measured by your internet provider. So we have 5 different people who are essentially measuring your data, including the manufacturer of the product that you bought and where you're at physically. But we'll talk more about that in a second. The other is good old public data. So if you own a home, you've got a registered deed, and that has all been digitized. That is all public information. If you have, let's say, a car that you registered in a particular locality, all of that information, the year, make, model, estimated value, personal property tax, that's all recorded, and that all can be accessed as well and becomes part of big data. There are other groups called data warehouses who do nothing but gather data on you. Did you use your Kroger card, your Food Lion card? Did you go to a Whole Foods? Did you use a Walgreens or CVS shopping card? All of those third-party applications that you do every day and don't think twice about and save you some money, that's all recorded and put into a data warehouse. Now we can also talk about what we call non-SQL data. Now SQL is a fancy acronym for learning how to sort through the data, and there is some data that just defies characteristics. It doesn't have a particular method to be sorted into. Now let's take for instance the fact that you go to an amusement park and you use your credit card in the amusement park, but the amusement park gathers your data as well, and it doesn't really have a particular way to put that into a warehouse. That may be non-SQL data. There may be other things that you do, like if you have facial recognition at an airport, or if you're traveling overseas, data that's gathered there becomes non-SQL data. The other is in-stream network data. We talked earlier about the fact that your internet provider is tracking your every move. There was some controversial legislation that has gone through Congress that would allow your internet provider to gather more information on you and share it with your knowledge, because you authorize them to install that service into your house. And if you're like me, you didn't read the 15 pages of small print, you just signed and wanted to get back on the web. Well, when you did that, you signed away your rights to protect that private data, which is a lot of reason why people use VPN, virtual private networks, and use news hosting services to gather information that they want and not be necessarily tracked. And we talk about that in reference to the dark web, but we don't want to get into that just yet. The other is legacy documents. Now these are documents that existed, perhaps your birth certificate, something you may have inherited from years ago, and these documents are being scanned into the system and digitized, but technically they're legacy documents because they were paper only. And the other, and this is my personal favorite, is BIRT, or Business Intelligence Reporting Tools. This really, frankly, could be skewed as being a little creepy, but I think it's great, and I'll explain why in a second. So you go to Target. You have the Target app on your phone, and you start to receive coupons. The interesting thing about this is Target is measuring where you're walking within the store, where you're lingering, where you're stopping, how long you're stopping, what section of the store you're stopping in, and they will begin to pump coupons to you. This is a way of using big data. The interface and intelligence tools that you're using are changing every day. You may be using any of a number of couponing sites, Groupon, other information that you're looking at in your browser that may trigger an advertiser to send you information, and that's all coming from the gathered intelligence of this business intelligent gathering tools. Now, a lot of different ways you can use big data, and some of them are absolutely terrific. While I know a lot of people have frustrations with Walmart, I've used Walmart as a client before. They have worked with me, and I've worked with them, and they really have an amazing data collection system. We could talk about their point of sale system, but the thing that I want to focus on is how they're using big data in order to get goods that consumers want to them quicker, faster, and more efficiently. So we may all remember Hurricane Sandy. It was really an incredible storm, but Walmart was able to do some predictive analysis using their own big data and look at shopping trends around natural disasters or threats of severe weather. And what they were able to find was that people really, really, really want strawberry Pop-Tarts, of all things. Along with batteries and flashlights and all of those good things, it was really interesting to me that they were able to predict an upsurge in demand for strawberry Pop-Tarts and get them to the stores in advance of the storm landing. People who were trying to prepare, you think about it, it's a well-sealed, non-spoilage food stuff that could be used during power outages and had some nutritional value. Made sense. Walmart wins, the consumer wins, and big data helps to solve a problem. Now we can talk about manufacturing as well. Manufacturers are always trying to become leaner and have more efficient operations, and big data can really help them to figure out problems with prototypes and to do testing before an item is released to the public. Now, when you come to Rolls-Royce making aircraft engines, you want to make sure the engine works before you put it on the plane, and you put people in the plane, and you put lives at risk. So what they do is a form of the Internet of Things. Millions of bits of data are coming off of thousands of sensors within the engine. As they test the engine, they grab all of that data, they aggregate it, they shake it loose, they try to notice patterns and failures so that they can fix all of those problems as they go through. And this is really important because obviously you don't want to discover the problems when people are in the planes and the planes are in the air. So I should tell you up front, I do a lot of big data analysis. It is one of my favorite things to do in the world. When I was assigned this chapter, I was thrilled because I use big data every single day. Now, I should tell you, I'm a digital media planner for a large national cable provider, so it is my job to access big data and to make it relevant for my customers who are advertisers trying to reach particular individuals. So I start off with the who, what, where, when, and why. I sit down with the client, I figure out who do they want to reach. Is it something in a demographic, ages 18 to 35? Is it a psychographic, people who have a tendency to engage with ads and actually make purchases versus a browser? And also the geographic location. I don't want to advertise Fords at a dealership in Southwest Virginia to someone in Georgia. So I take all of that data and I help to develop algorithms. And the algorithms tell me how to reach that particular individual. Now, the other question we have to do is, why do you want to engage the audience? Do you want to build your brand recognition, or do you want to actually sell them a specific product or an action or an event? When we know that information, then we can go back and start to look at big data for people who have, for instance, attended music concerts, that go to movies, that like fine dining, that buy bottles of wine over the internet. We can identify all of that from big data aggregators, and we can put that together to try to put the right commercial in front of the right person. It's, for a nerd like me, it's the greatest thing in the world. And when and where do you want to watch? Do you want them to watch your ad? Do you want them to see it at night when they're relaxing, in the morning when they're energized? Do you want them to see it at work when they probably should be working, but they're on Facebook, or they're on YouTube, or they're looking at ESPN.com or FoxNews.com? And we can take those three very separate things and come up with a plan using big data. And I've put three of the sources that I use. I use these three sources every single day: Kantar, Videology, and Nielsen Group. And based on the answers that the clients give me to the questions that I ask, I can develop a plan that will put the ad in front of the right people at the right time when they're most likely to respond to that ad. And that really is the most important thing. Beyond that, I have to look at a person's sort of psychography of how they interact with ads. Are you a person who will watch an entire ad and then click on it? Do you watch it for 2 seconds and click? Do you like in-banner video? Do you like to have video pre-roll in front of news stories that you're watching on CNN or MSNBC or ESPN? Or are you an on-demand consumer? Do you like to sit in front of your TV on the couch and start looking at 5 and 6 episodes at a time? Based on your viewing patterns, I'm able to put the right commercial in front of you at the right time. Look, it's a very complicated thing, and big data makes it easier for us because we're able to aggregate all of that data down. And by aggregation, I mean that you just narrow the funnel. You make it a little bit tighter. And when we do that, it really helps us to put the right message in front of the right audience. So I've kind of talked a little bit about why I like big data, but I'm telling you right now, if you're young and you're looking to get into a fairly secure future, big data is the way to go. I mean, frankly, it rates a 73 on the job scarcity index. The higher that number, the more in demand a field is, and 73 is almost approaching the red zone. 47 days is the average time that someone with experience in data aggregation and big data technology has to wait to get a job, and the average income, I think, is somewhere around 124,000 for those. So you would expect to start a little less in the beginning, and certainly there are opportunities to make a whole lot more in the future. So I think the future is really good for big data. The question is it something you should be afraid of? Now, before I get into my question, which is, should you fear big data or embrace it? And what are the possible socioeconomic consequences for the misuse of big data? Let me tell you that I talk to customers every day. And a lot of my customers are nervous about using big data. As a consumer, it does bother me. I don't have time to read 15 paragraphs every time I install a new version of iTunes. As an advertiser, I think it's amazing because it allows us to reduce inefficiency. It allows us to use revenue streams more efficiently, and it really makes a big difference for us in society today. But the question is to you, do you fear big data? Are you worried about someone getting their hands on your medical records or your financial records and what they could do with that? So it is an interesting question, and I thank you very much for your time. I hope you gained something from this, and maybe you don't think that big data is big brother after all.